Well, welcome to the October 7th regular meeting of the Windham Southeast School District. I'd like to, before we convene, I'd like to begin the meeting with a moment of silence in memory of Vicki Linn, who a longtime member of the Academy School community who passed away this week. So please join me in a moment of silence and respect for Victoria. Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. We have a quorum, and I believe the meeting was properly warned, so we are in order. And the first item is the recognition of visitors. And I don't believe we have any visitors that we're intending to hear from specifically. So we'll go directly to the consent agenda. And I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes of September 16th and October 1st, 2020, and the warrants of September 8th, September 14th, September 21st, September 28th, and payrolls of September 14th and September 25th, 2020 as presented. I have a motion, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Thomas. Moved by Thomas Nolan. And second, please. Sean? Thank you. Seconded by Sean Murphy. All those in favor, please signify by unmuting and saying aye.
Dave, could we have
Aye.
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 Dave?
Yes,
You didn't call for discussion?
you're right, I didn't. Sorry. So we'll hold the nays then until we have our discussion. Thank you, Ann.
I would like to request that the minutes of the last two meetings be amended to reflect 1 VSA 312A2 regarding public meeting. If the votes are not unanimous, they need to be called again by roll call. Wendy was more right than you knew when a few weeks ago she asked for a count. It shouldn't just be a count. It should be a roll call recording. Anytime the vote is not unanimous.
Okay, I'm going to point out that Wendy's not a voter.
No. She was asking you for clarification. That's all. I was just saying.
Yeah, I understand. And the guidance we got a few weeks ago from the attorney on open meeting law said that we didn't need to count the votes unless, if we did it by recall, but we didn't need to count the votes. We just need to record that they were, the decision that it was passed or not passed. But I will take that under advisement and have a look. And if necessary, we'll go back and amend the minutes.
Okay, it's 1 VSA 312. You'll find it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean?
Yes, I have a quick comment about the warrants and payrolls. I could do it either under the Finance Committee report.
No, this is good.
Okay, all right. I went through the warrants and payrolls today. And unfortunately, we're going to try to have a finance meeting today before the meeting, but it did not transpire. So I apologize for that. And I went through all the warrants and payrolls just before the meeting. And I would just like to make a comment that Frank, I think, has worked really hard on getting a pre-buy for the oil that is required by the district for the heating. And I did go through that and look at it. And there are two schools, Dummerston and Oak Grove, that still use the predominant amount of oil in the district. And I know Frank has been working hard to try to do something to switch over to not a fossil-based fuel for those two schools. And the total was $53,444 for the purchase of number 2 fuel oil, and Dummerston and Oak Grove amounted to more than half of that amount at $28,957. So it's just an informational thing. I thought it was interesting, but it also has to do with what what our plan could be going forward to reduce the fossil fuel consumption in those 2 schools predominantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any other comments on the minutes or the warrants as presented? Okay, again, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the consent agenda is approved. We have had some communications this week, or the last actually 3 weeks since we met in a regular meeting, and I believe they will be addressed in the administrative reports. So we will go directly to administrative reports. Andy?
Thanks, David. Can you allow me to share my screen?
Yes, I can. That should do it.
All right, looks like I can. Perfect. So I apologize. I'm in advance. I'm going to do a little slideshow to kind of share the information. It seems to be the easiest way to communicate things and to get highlight the different things that are going on. So we have some information, in terms of updates. I have 3 retirements to share with you. I do have some news around the calendar. I want to give you some updates around the start of the school year in terms of our status, where people are. I have some attendance and enrollment information, as well as the use of our Wednesday. I'll talk a little bit about the step 2 to step 3, as well as an update on our anti-racism and social justice work. And like clockwork, the dog in the background is starting to bark, so I may have to. So we have 3 retirements that were just noticed that I would put these forward to the board to accept. Rhonda Weingartner has announced her retirement effective November 8th, 2020. And she's submitting her and asking for approval for that. Christopher Engel is submitting his retirement for effective the end of the school year. And David Houghton from the Career Center is submitting his retirement for the end of the school year as well. So I submit these to you for your approval and acceptance of those items.
Thank you, Andy. Could I have a motion, please, to accept the retirement of Rhonda Weingarten, Christopher Engel, and David Houghton? And I hope we'll have spellings for Wendy at some point.
Yep.
On those names.
So moved.
So made.
Thank you, Tim, and seconded by Ann. Any discussion? I just want to mention, I believe Rhonda is a longtime counselor at Dummerston. Is that correct?
I believe she's at the high school.
Oh, at the high school. Oh, okay. I'm thinking of someone else that I understand was retiring. Great, thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting these 3 retirements indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the retirements are approved. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. So I shared in the board update last week on Friday that the big bill, as part of the legislative updates, House Bill 969, that was the bill that contained a lot of information around the hold harmless for ADM. There were some other funding issues that were resolved within that bill as well, and that language that resolved the differences in language between the House and the Senate. Within that bill was a provision for the reduction of school days for students. It does not address a reduction for staff days. So the reduction, it was signed by the governor on the 2nd. I didn't realize that until today when I looked it up. So we'll be working on the calendar to reflect a reduction of 6 student days from 176 to 170. We don't have a sense of when those days will be yet. My inclination is to put most of those days towards the end of the year so we can do professional development curriculum work, but also to get kids in who as much continuous schooling as possible. We may add a day in January when the transition break between the semesters occurs if we have some significant changes in the model and an instructional program. But that calendar will be updated. Barb and I will work on it this week, and we'll get feedback from the union representation as well as the administrators to hopefully roll that out within a week or so.
And Andy, those 5, was it 5 or 6 days that are?
Well, we're at 176 student days,
Right.
and so we
the
can't go
state-
less than
the s-
170.
Yeah, the statute was 175, right? And we just happen to
Yes.
have an extra day. Yeah. So that's to recognize the 5 days in September when the late start of
Correct.
school in September, those 5 additional teacher days.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Yes. So in terms of where we are right now, I wanted to share certain things. We were discussing this with teachers and administrators. This feels like for many of, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, that the work that the teachers have done has been incredible, and the work the administration has done has been absolutely phenomenal. But for the educators in the meeting this evening, I want to make sure that we recognize that this feels like December 23rd, and it's only October right now. And we've had an incredible commitment from our administrators and teachers for schools to open in the midst of not only a pandemic, but incredible social unrest within our country, the stresses around that, the stresses around conversations that are coming to the table with just the upheaval in regards to an election year and the constant feedback with that. And so it has been stressful. Our administrators and many of our teachers worked on average an extra 12 days over the course of the summer. And that includes, as well as the school nurses and teaching staff that was contributing to reopening of school. So it's important to know that a lot of our focus right now has been on the emotional and physical safety and well-being of our staff. We have people that are trying to manage remote and hybrid learning environments, and it's a juggling act. I feel as if, from teachers that I speak with, many of them have indicated that it feels as if it's their first year of teaching all over again. And again, we would be remiss if we didn't share this feedback, that we have to make sure that we're taking care of our staff and our teachers and our administrators so that they can do the work so that students can continue to learn. We've continued to focus on our emphasis on safety. Some of the decisions may not be popular, but we're making these decisions in the safety and the interest of all our building occupants, our students and staff alike. We need to make sure that we're monitoring our administrator and teacher fatigue. And when I say fatigue, it's both the physical fatigue, but it's also compassion fatigue. And these are things that we want to make sure that our school sites are going back to, that they're taking that time for mindfulness, that they're examining their roles and their work with each other. Again, I'm not going to continue to belabor this point, but the levels of exhaustion and stress have definitely had an impact on where we can plan and our long-term planning and focus. And so sometimes we're thinking about what's the next day, and other days we have this capacity, but it definitely has had an impact on where we are. It's just mindful about the level of initiatives and how we're using our time to make sure that we're focusing our efforts so that students can learn.
Andy, can I interrupt you there
Yes.
just for a second? Tim has his hand up, and I don't know if it's time sensitive or not, so I wanted to ask
Oh,
him.
no, go ahead.
Okay,
Andy.
great, thanks, Tim.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy.
Yep. So I'll get back to some of those points. I'm gonna have to move my screen around a little bit because some of these. So our attendance that's been taking place, we've averaged between 92 and 98% attendance for all the schools in the SD and the SU. So we had on the low end, 92% up in Putney. This is reflective of both the remote learning students and the in-person students. And it would take days and days to kind of disaggregate the remote students from because of the way the classes are set up in Power School. But attendance has been strong. One of the worries that we may have had at the start of the school year was what's going to be with attendance. You'll see that membership has kind of the decimal points because that's a reflection of changing student count, and it's an average of the every day of school in September, and the attendance is an average, and it was calculated as a percent through that. So attendance has been strong, nothing that's a significant warning sign on an aggregate. Individually, the schools have their processes and practices where they're identifying students that are missing significant time. And we have action plans put in place to address those items. So our step 2 to step 3 transition.
Andy, could I
yes,
ask you just for a minute before you go on to describe some of those practices for identifying those students? When you add up the numbers, it's a lot of kids. Even though it's, the percentages look great, but it's a lot of kids. And, how do we go find them?
Yeah, so this is fairly typical for what a school system would look like. We might see a little higher percentages, around 97% in the month of September, but this is fairly typical. So when the teacher notices a student's out, they notify the counselor would notify the administrator. That would enact a set of steps that would start to have a level of outreach. I know that the high school, for instance, has a regular meeting where they discuss the absences for students. What we are going to be doing is working with our teacher leaders to help do some of the outreach as well to families when they're missing school. This is factored into attendance is one thing that does factor into when we think about prioritizing the moves from different learning environments or the supports that are put in place. Attendance is a factor that gets taken into consideration. So the step 2 to step 3 transition, our leadership teams have started the planning process of what does this look like. Again, with our emphasis on safety for all the building occupants, we are adhering to the 6 feet of physical distancing. Much of that's related to the needs and the airflow in the building, but it's also a generalized safety precaution, especially as we're heading into the winter. Students are going to be in the building more often, and we want to make sure that we're managing the flow of children and adults in the building effectively. So school leaders have started developing plans to bring more students back into the building and bringing them back more frequently. The emphasis with that work has been doing it on planning coherent models to do so, with a focus on structure, managing greater students in the building, especially as those temps get a little colder. And then our order of information flow, we will notify our staff first as soon as any plans are developed so that they can begin to plan, especially teachers with children that may have childcare needs or issues, for those that may live out of district and have to figure out what they're doing with kids on their own. And then we'll notify families and the community about those changes. But there's a number of different things. It's not as quickly as flipping a switch and just bringing more kids back in. We want to make sure we're doing it safely with priorities in mind, but also understanding the implications for kind of auxiliary services or ancillary services like transportation, foods, and what those changes might have to be. Because MESCAS has buses on standby so that they can accommodate some extra students, as well as space on the buses that would go along. Paul and I have talked a lot about internet access. We're continuing to update the list of students that are without internet. Xfinity still has their Internet Essentials or Comcast Internet Essentials, and that's that $10 a month program. We have fewer than 60 people without it, but that list is being updated by counselors as we speak. It's been challenging to get to work with Xfinity. I think that they're more focused on the larger urban areas with more people, so that they can find a larger target audience, and so to work with as a partner. So we're working through the details on how we can get around that to support those families a little more directly. And we'll sorry, we've got a barking dog in the background. So the weekly structure, and again, this goes to the idea of balance. But our early release model for the student day has been focused on how are we staying centered and grounded. And a lot of our staff felt like Wednesdays were a great day for catch up. especially get their feet underneath them. And so we've used that time on Wednesdays with this early release model to really build a culture of learning and collaboration. So teacher time has been used for the typical meetings associated with education so that students can continue to learn. This might be training, it might be different grade level meetings. There's teacher collaboration and planning time. There are also the EST, the Education Solutions Team meetings, 504 meetings, IEP, PBIS, remote learning, professional development time, grade level meetings, department meetings, faculty meetings, connecting with families and students. As well as during those Wednesdays, generally most of our schools are conducting at least one meeting per month related to diversity and equity and having engagement with that work. And you'll see where that's coming in a second. So we surveyed mid-September what some of the staff needs were in terms of what was the best delivery method and model for professional development. This is kind of reflective of some of the stress that people were seeing and feeling around, can I just focus on something and do it at my own pace? So we made some switches around. So one of the requests was for more what we'd call asynchronous professional development. And you see there, close to, a little over, we got 53% of the teachers liked the idea of asynchronous learning, whether they were podcasts or resources provided, whereas less than that was really focused on the synchronous learning for those items. So that was that shift from that direct live professional development model to more creating more resources for teachers to do at their leisure in order to be able to gain the knowledge and skills necessary so that they can deliver effective instruction so that kids can learn. Technology supports, and again, this was primarily an elementary level teacher. So some of the supports were focused primarily around Seesaw, which is the lower grades. It's the learning management system that the primary grades are using, with some needing support around Zoom. But Seesaw was a newer, was not necessarily newer, but we rolled it out in more widespread use across the SU this year. And then within the social emotional learning supports, we've noticed that the biggest thing, really kind of structures for students to connect with the school and each other was the biggest thing, and then followed by manageable methods for connecting, and then virtual routines and how to teach them. And then there were kind of a number of different, but those were the priority items that popped up. And then literacy instruction, kind of across the board within a range of reason. The biggest topic being there really that asynchronous skill instruction. So in a learning environment where typically many teachers are used to having the students right in front of them when they're working on things like literacy instruction, how do we do that asynchronously? And how do we create these learning environments where students are able to learn, still acquire the critical skills and foundational skills of literacy when the teacher's not directly in front of them or sitting in the classroom with them? And those were followed by kind of strategies for engaging kids in virtual work, so that many of these needs continue to follow into the consistent professional development planning. Not surprisingly, asynchronous skills instruction was the biggest math need as well, followed by, again, setting up those virtual structures and then using some of those tools. Dreambox and Zern are the big tools that we're using for math instruction. They both meet the math standards that are set forth in the curriculum as tools to reach those standards. But there were kind of some pressing needs. Zern is newer to people this year. It's an engaging platform. I haven't seen Dreambox being used, but again, it's something similar that they've been using. So what really changed within that? I'll go back here. The transition, the biggest thing that changed in the middle of September was this transition to asynchronous professional development. We added additional remote learning support as well. So we have some interim roles that we're looking to hire and expand the level of support, as well as we were able to identify a technology assistant. That would be a wage grade 5 position. That's a higher level set of skill. And that's a person that would work with creating these digital environments for teachers and helping them develop their coursework and also being that person on the fly that could help them adjust. Curriculum instruction team has established office hours where they're meeting with people. The coaches are supporting with assessment, organizing data, assisting with their planning, prioritizing within that, they're prioritizing the remote and the newer teachers. There's still individualized coaching taking place. And the coaches have also gone so far as to create standing meetings with the remote teachers to co-plan lessons. And there's continued ongoing mentoring and support for new teachers. And so the feedback to try to meet the staff needs and to help them out has been pretty robust. So that leads us into our 90-day update. And when we think
Andy,
about,
let me excuse me for a second. Would this be a good place to entertain questions
Yes.
about the attendance and the safety measures and
yeah,
teacher
we can
support stuff
talk.
before- or are these so related that you want to continue right
No,
along?
we can take some questions.
Okay, great. Tim?
Okay, first, given what you said about fatigue, and I appreciate your sensitivity to that, Andy. I was surprised that you're opting out of taking 2 days off before Thanksgiving. Wouldn't the teachers and administration welcome those 2 days?
We went back and forth on that, and the worry was that looking into the winter and watching a surging series of COVID cases, the thought around that time period was, let's get our kids in as many days as possible, and we'll work with the union on that. We haven't set the calendar forward, but while I'm balancing the fatigue around that, I'm also looking at what the national map is doing around COVID, as we're seeing this huge spike in cases in different places. And some of the maps I've been looking at, on the graphs rather, when they kind of track the surge, each of these different, this is the third surge we've seen from the initial onset of the virus. This has had this highest starting point in terms of having that rapid escalation of cases. And so I think that the idea was, let's get kids in as many days as possible before kind of taking some of those days, because, we're not, we're not, while we're doing well with the virus and managing the virus, I would say the state's not immune from these kind of incursions of it.
Okay, my other two questions are, again, with student feedback, are we discussing any further the inclusion of a student on the board, or maybe that's a question for David?
That's a question for all of us. I haven't actually, it's been on my mind, but I haven't really gotten it on an agenda yet, but we should, thanks for the reminder, and we'll put that on for next meeting.
Yeah.
And my last comment is, I think it would help to disaggregate the data from BUHS and pre-K through 8.
With
On
the needs survey?
Yeah.
Yeah, the needs survey was administered primarily to elementary teachers.
So BUHS didn't participate?
No, that was mostly related to, because there is a little bit of a divide between the needs that were there. And so this is Deb and Paul and the coaches have been working very closely with the elementary, because we've seen a significant need there, and the structures are just a little different. So we can work on getting some data from the high school and middle school staff around where their needs are, probably for, to share next month or so.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Emily.
Hello. So I had a few questions. One was before the data was presented. And I guess I was wondering, Andy, I heard you say that, thinking about, you were going to be really mindful about when we're going to bring more students into the building to ensure that there can be proper distancing. And I guess I wondered, was this next phase of planning to bring more students in, or was it to expand the current number of days that students that are already in schools would be in school? Just for clarification.
Well, it's kind of both. It depends upon the model. So in some of the elementary schools, and many of them where the students are going for 2 days, expanding the number of days that kids are in the building would increase the number of kids in the building. So if a Monday, Tuesday cohort was to go to school Thursday, Friday, those Thursday, Friday students would be going to school on Monday, Tuesday. So that would effectively double the population in the building if we were to do it all at once. So the idea is that we would do that, plan that process out slowly and carefully, so that just like in the first month, we were getting used to new routines and transitions with the protocols, we would want to do it slowly and within some fixed timelines, so that when we're bringing kids back in, we're doing it in a manner that the building can accommodate. So it would be kind of a mixture of both.
Okay. No, that makes sense, because when you had said bringing kids back in, I had instantly thought remote kids, but actually what you're saying is kids in the building would be, cohorts would be mixed essentially. So that's helpful. My second question is on the asynchronous skill instruction. So I guess I was wondering, when I saw all that data, so are there, it's really useful to hear back what the teachers are needing or what their challenges are. I guess I wondered, with the skill instruction, are there professional development opportunities that we're seeking out, or outside supports that we're engaging to help teachers manage that?
During the back to school professional development, we had used some outside, we'd used some outside support to help provide instruction around developing remote learning. Bringing in the tech support, the tech assistant was an additional way to meet those needs. And we also have some contracted services that we're already using to work with students and teachers rather.
Okay, I was just curious because I know my background is partially in Montessori education, and I know that a lot of Montessori teaching approach is asynchronous. Like the kids go off and do some work, and they have like little cohorts that are, at different levels of instruction, while other kids are actively engaging in work on their own. So I just didn't know if there was any active engagement in the school's part in kind of learning from these models and how they do that.
I know that the coaches have a regular meeting about the art of coaching, and that's a weekly meeting. I believe it's Tuesday, where they discuss, how are we best supporting, and because there really is a skill to coaching, how they approach it, and it's working with the adult learner. And I know that they've undertaken that work. And I'm not sure I haven't talked with Deb and Paul closely enough about like who are we looking at and what are we doing for, the modeling for that development of that work. But I know it's a regular meeting where they're really discussing how are they meeting the needs of adults, and then how do they approach really that art of working with the adult learner.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Emily, I don't know if you're trying to get at whether the learning of that by the staff could be done asynchronously online as well. I had that same thought when that part went by about remote opportunities for teachers to engage in learning. I know the music teachers across the state took a course together during the summer on developing online lessons. And it was incredibly helpful. And they're continuing to consult now during the year and sort of build on that. And I'm just wondering if there aren't consultants around that could also might be available, that we could contract with, to be available for staff to contact when they had time.
Yeah, I know that much of the work that Deb and Paul and Lily and Brian are working on is that asynchronous work in terms of creating videos and modules for teachers to learn in. Deb or Paul, I could defer to you if you want to talk about some of the work that they're doing right now. But if I put you on the spot, I'm sorry.
Sure, I can speak to that. I think it sounds like there's two pieces we're talking about. We're talking about teacher learning, and then we're also talking about student learning. Teacher learning, that survey, we really wanted to find out two things. One was, how do our teachers want to learn? And then also, what did they want to learn? And so they really asked to have synchronous opportunities, which I think, David, is what you're referring to.
Yes.
Where we were providing resources, providing webinars, providing access to organizations from around the country, really, around best practice in a variety of things. And then one of the, when asking what they wanted to learn about, one of the specific things that they were really seeking, and still are, and we all still are, is how do we engage our kids in asynchronous learning, because we can't be there every moment, especially for our remote kids. So that asynchronous skill instruction, Emily, I think is what you're referring to. And yeah, Montessori is wonderful. I absolutely love Montessori. It is a face-to-face model though. And that is actually something that really lends itself well to social distancing kind of practices, because it does give kids that, you know, individualized kind of hands-on opportunity for some of their learning. What the teachers were asking for, though, was remote asynchronous skill instruction. And that's something we're still really working to get our brains wrapped around. There's limitations. There's limitations on what the Chromebooks are able to do. And that's just based on the model of a Chromebook, that we can't hand over the control to kids, which some computers can do, but we just found out Chromebooks can't. And so it's a matter of figuring out how can we've done a lot with videos. We've done a lot with teacher-made videos. And that's really been what I feel like has been our biggest growth point in the last month. Teachers are making really engaging videos for kids in small little chunks of small little bits of knowledge. And then with that video, the kids can go off and do something away from the screen where they're applying that knowledge that they gained from viewing their own teacher, teaching them a skill. So we're still working on it.
Sure, it'll continue. Thank you. Other questions from the board? Emily?
So thanks Deb, because I was confusing the two. I was talking about the asynchronous student learning. So thank you for clarifying, because I was a little confused in the survey too. So now I completely understand what we're talking about. I guess because I was saying about asynchronous student learning, I just didn't have a question. I wanted to give a shout out because I saw Academy School, maybe other schools did too, but I saw on Academy School's Facebook page that they had been doing asynchronous art projects and having kids post them online. So I just wanted to shout out to, I guess, the school in general and Kelly Young for leading that, because I thought it was a great project and I enjoyed seeing all the students' artwork.
It really was exquisite. Liz?
Yeah, and moving back to possibly having more kids in school, is teacher comfort taken into account there? With hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a big concern, and this is a huge. It's kind of the elephant in the room, that we want to make sure that our teachers are supported. And we talked as a group today with both the elementary and the secondary principals that while we can have some plans moving forward, we've got to make sure that our teachers are receiving this information well in advance before we make kind of large public announcements around what we want to do. And that's as a support to people so that they can, you know, expect what's coming. It's to be transparent about what we're doing and creating the environment so that kids can learn. And it's also acknowledging what those worries might have to be. You know, I know that there's a significant pressure, and as I said before, a lot of the decisions that I have to make don't make me popular, and people may not be a big fan of those decisions, but we're doing it in the safety of everyone in the building, students and staff alike. It would be challenging that if we rush to make this rapid move of students back into the building, that we increase the staffing and the staff to student ratio so much that some staff opted out and were required to take leaves, and we would be back to step one because we would have to juggle things. Finding staff right now has been incredibly challenging around the work. So we want to make sure that we're doing things whatever we can within recognition of the safety of everyone in the building.
Other questions from the board? Michelle?
Hi, Andy. I'm wondering, so much stress on the teachers, and I know families too. I know we've only been doing this for a month, but what would it like, what are we going to be doing to measure how successful we are? Like, what does that sort of plan look like over time? Is it a matter of waiting a certain amount of time and seeing if kids are making benchmarks, but using all of these strategies and you know, no one feeling solid? I'm just curious how we're monitoring the success of actually educating our kids.
So we're still rolling out benchmarks for student data. And there's a first round that will be most likely done towards the end of the month. whether it's the DIBELS, which is a lower grade diagnostic indicator of basic early literacy skills, I believe is what it stands for. I think Paul's nodding that I got it correct. But there's a kind of a first round of benchmark assessments that'll be taking place, and we would look at that data, look at prioritizing our needs, what level of differentiation has to take place within the classroom and that tier 1 level of instruction to modify for those student needs. And then we would administer assessments throughout the course of the year. So the data cycle of looking at student performance still remains to track where kids are, to adjust instruction. I mean, the data itself isn't taken just to give an assessment. It's really used so that we can enhance our instruction and meet student needs. Those pieces are rolling out. We want to make sure that, because some of the tools are a new suite of tech tools that would go along with things, that we're rolling it slowly out with the teachers so that they can kind of get that information in bite-sized chunks about what does this look like to give students those assessments. The coaches right now are, Lily and Brian, are heavily involved with the schools and planning, as well as helping doing some of those assessments and organizing the data. So we will have some of those initial data grabs about where kids are to do some then planning, and then work with the assessment calendar for the remainder of the year.
Thank you. Tara Castine?
Hi, thanks for taking my hand. Tara, as we talk about school, I know Putney is in a very unique situation where we have had teachers be moved around to accommodate remote learning and the needs to stay home. Is there like discussions on what will happen with those grades or classes that are particularly affected, like the 3rd grade at PCS, who, if they come back into the building, have more kids than we have? We voiced that it's a problem having that many kids in a classroom. Is that part of the thought process and discussions that are being had?
Yeah, that was one of the more, we started having that conversation today. That's become more, that particular grade configuration, in full honesty, is one of the more challenging ones. That's with the in-person instruction, so that grade level did come up today. As a leadership team, we didn't reach consensus on what that would look like yet in the planning, and we have agreed to come back and continue working on that one in the coming days and weeks.
All right, great. Because I know as a parent of a child in 3rd grade, it is a very big concern due to the delta of learning in that class group, and having that many kids for one teacher was definitely a strain in the past. I do have another question. As we look at bringing the kids back into the building again, special ed, and maybe I missed it, because I did arrive a little bit late to the meeting. I know that our paras are teaching right now. You're not offering one-on-ones or additional learning within the classrooms. Will that be addressed as part of this plan to put that back into place for the children that need the one-on-ones or the more hands-on learning?
I would defer to the case managers around special education, as well as our special ed director and coordinators. But those pieces, any sort of changes would be in accordance with their IEPs and would be in consultation with the special ed department around any sort of.
No, I'm not talking about IEPs. I'm talking about children who haven't been offered a 504 or IEP because their needs were being met through a secondary teacher or a para in the classroom. So their breakout groups were allowing the one-on-ones to happen. And because of COVID, and that did not continue. I think there's like a tier, is it tier 1?
So you're talking about a non-identified, yeah, we're kind of getting a bit of the weeds here, but you're thinking about it's basically an MTSS model, multi-tiered systems of support model, in terms of what levels of supports are being put in place for kids. I'll tell you, in all honesty, that there are a lot of strains throughout, and we're not unique as a school district with strains on its MTSS framework. And that's because we've had the level of juggling of what does hybrid and remote learning look like. And so many of those MTSS instructors, the teachers, the academic support teachers, are also doing double duty as classroom teachers right now. And so that's a continued conversation around what we're doing. I think it's easy to say, it's not easy to say, and it's unfortunate to say that across the country, the COVID has placed a significant pressure on students that need additional supports and learning. And it really falls, a lot of that does fall to the classroom teacher about what are those tier 1 supports being put in place for people.
Okay, I just know in the circles that I talk in that it's a huge question mark for a lot of parents. So
it's a
Thank
big
you.
question everywhere. Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Chelsea Wheel?
Hi, thank you. I'm wondering, Andy, if you can be a little more clear about the word timeline when we talk about shifting models and bringing more students in. Is a lot of time or a lot of notice 2 weeks? Is it starting November 1st? Thinking about those of us who will need to make big life changes,
Yeah.
could you tell us, like, we would have at least 2 weeks notice? Or
I know, Chelsea, and I owe you an email response as well, and I apologize for the delay on that. Part of it was we were waiting for this conversation today with the teams.
Oh, nobody's keeping track of response time, I hope, at least for me.
No, I did. I saw your email. I've actually left it as unread in my queue to make sure I would get back to it, and so it didn't get lost. We would want at least a couple weeks notice for people, and that's for families and staff alike. I'm concerned with staff of, many people have spent the last month organizing their lives around their current work schedule, and I know how difficult it is to find childcare, especially for families that have children in other schools or that live in other communities. And so we want to be fair to everyone and give, as soon as we have a timeline, the staff will be the first to know about that so that they can begin planning and making preparations.
Okay, but you're saying we'd have a minimum of 2 weeks.
I would imagine it would be something close to that.
Thank you. Aaron Kachak?
Yes, hi, Andy. I was wondering if you would be able to share how the district is addressing the administrators and teachers' exhaustion. What are you guys doing to support them?
Well, that's a hard thing. I know that, so I saw some of the schools some of the schools I saw today said, hey, take a mental health. Part of it, the initial part is awareness. We need to really work together as a group to figure out what we're doing. We've encouraged people to engage in self-care, to make sure that they're taking time. I know at central office, we have Jean Gilbert is making sure that we're taking that time in those moments. I've seen that's happening at different schools. I do think that's a part that we can probably do a better job with, whether it's through our COVID teams at each building, just because it's a standing group, or the school-based leadership teams, just to have an awareness level of that and making sure that we're making time for those pauses in the day to take that deep breath, whether it's 5 minutes of mindful meditation or just recognizing that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And even though the numbers in Vermont are really great, the world around us seems to be in a degree of chaos right now. And so there are times where we can just make sure we're finding that time in the day to laugh purposefully and engage in some of the less stress work around being with kids and being with each other.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Andy, I think you can still share and take the screen back.
Yep, let's see, here we go. I think I got the right, I have multiple windows and multiple tabs open, so I think I have the right one. So we were talking about, I think it was my first official board meeting. The board passed its commitment its ongoing commitment to anti-racism and social justice. And when we look at the different aspects of that, all those elements, those 8 bullet points in that commitment, are all really connected to what I call systemic change, evolution, and adaptation. Those pieces all morph into what I look at in terms of a long-term strategic planning. And really that long-term strategic planning is set forth, and this is the work we'll start doing later this school year, is around 3 foundational pillars, and they're all tied to those essential functions and mission of our schools. Talking about educational success and student outcomes, community and community engagement, and systems and operational structures. And so when we look at those different pillars, I tend to think of them, where do they find themselves in one of those 3 big things? And so if we're going to do some strategic planning, we would focus on these items. And the ongoing commitment become really key leverage points around that. And so some of the where this work exists, and we'll talk more again later on about when I talk about establishing success and outcomes for students, we're talking about establishing high level expectations and outcomes for them so that they all lead to an engaged and informed citizens, developing an articulated pre-K through 12 instructional framework, identifying, implementing best practices, and establishing clarity and focus of these key indicators. When we think about community, we think about how does this roll into the idea of establishing purposeful structures and use of time, strengthening our relationships with our community partners, and building a relationship-based model of mutual supports between home and school. And then we think of systems. We think about how are we developing and supporting and retaining effective teachers and administrators? How are we examining our operational structure and alignment? What are we doing to establish and strengthen our communication systems? How are we developing infrastructure to support student learning? How are we creating coherent systems for information and distribution to employees so that they're best equipped to support student learning, and really ensuring that equitable distribution of resources so that kids can learn. And so when I look at it's hard to talk about the ongoing commitment without looking at what are the larger strategic implications and long-term planning implications for the district, because the two are really linked. That ongoing commitment is embedded in the strategic planning work, but it's really all tied around what are the essential functions and the missions of our school and our school district. So some of the work that's taken place around thus far. So as of this point, 7 of our 9 district schools have a diversity and equity team. 6 of the 9 schools have either held or are planning to hold a diversity and equity teacher team meeting. 8 of the 9 schools have a diversity and equity team leader. 2 of the 9 schools have student organizations related to diversity and equity. And 9 of our 9 schools have either held or plan to hold faculty discussions related to diversity and equity. So in addition to this, with the diversity teacher leader roles, we sent them some clarifying notes about what their roles are. They play really a key point in kind of moving this ongoing commitment forward. And so much of their work is going to be really revolving around, in addition to this kind of consistent study, how are they helping facilitate monthly staff professional development and conversations related to anti-racist practices, diversity and equity, developing and implementing student organizations designed to celebrate diversity, engage marginalized students, assisting as needed with reaching out to vulnerable students who are encountering difficulty with engaging in school, and working with the school administration to facilitate diversity and equity committees at the school site so that they can report back to the larger group. So they play kind of critical roles within that work. So some of the different bullet points. The first one was really, I would call that's the big one, because it kind of really captured everything. That talks about curriculum. It brought in places around community, ensuring what we're talking about with curriculum. What we've done so far is that some of the schools, again, this kind of gets into some bandwidth, because we've been focused consistently on getting the buildings open. But BUHS, for instance, has started using what is known as the Steinhardt Culturally Responsive Curriculum Scorecard to review their curriculum documents. We've talked about the need for a common curriculum. It's been established as our common curriculum score guide. And we're looking at our organizational chart so that we can align the resources and support so that there's a direct connection between curriculum and instruction and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So there's that through line that this work is not only being included in it, but that level of training and support is also there so that people are all developing their facilitation skills. In terms of our long-term implications, really the determination we need to make as a group as far as what's our common tool going to be. The Steinhardt curriculum responsive scorecard is good. We want to make sure if that's something that can be used across all subject areas or modified for all subject areas, or do we have to find something else? That leads to training and use of the use of that review tool, as well as developing curriculum with a goal to review and revise and update all our curriculum within a 5 to 7 year span to reflect these, to be a culturally responsive curriculum. Second bullet point, so I can get to it. I combined the two here. One was because these were both similar. As we talked, this was about providing social justice awareness and anti-racist training, as well as creating the space. Schools have already started to hold meetings related to anti-racism and social justice. There's one meeting held per month, thus, scheduled on the calendar to do this level of work. What again we need to see is this coherent development of time. We've been fortunate within the midst of the pandemic that we've been able to declare some of these remote Wednesdays as kind of early release student days to find that, but we want to make sure we're looking at the calendar for next year and ensuing years, that we have those early release times built into it so that there's an ongoing culture of professional learning. Goes along with alignment within our goals and our mission, our objectives, and our outcomes, what we'd like to see, still aligned with student learning, but how are we creating caring communities so that all kids can learn, as well as the training of facilitators. And facilitating is a skill, and it's one that there's a number, it's not just getting up and presenting in front of a group of people, but really facilitating for deeper learning is a skill. And that's work that our coaching team has started to delve into, but we want to make sure we're kind of developing a train the trainer model. Now, I think I talk about this in a couple slides, in developing a set of really well-versed teacher leaders that allow people to get deeper and to develop a greater understanding around the work. So when open, this next bullet point was about hiring and trying to hire from marginalized groups. As you know or may not know, teaching itself, or the teaching job market, is what I've seen in terms of looking to the research. The phrase that would come up consistently is hyper localized, and statistically most teachers tend to either find employment close to where they received their certificate or their graduate degree, or in a community near where they grew up. So that brings up some challenges. They're not insurmountable challenges, but we have identified individuals that we'd like to serve in an ad hoc group that would be looking at the level of how are we doing our recruiting and what goes into that. Where are we posting, or who are we reaching out for? Our HR director, who's at the same time transitioning from EES, helping them close the books out, onboarding someone new, learning the job as an HR director, and rolling out a new role, a new third-party administrator for our HSA, HRA, and FSA accounts, with open enrollment starting in a week or so. Has signed up for Indeed and Handshake, Handshake is one of the new apps that schools and colleges are using. And she's also been informed of a diversity fair at Amherst College coming up in a few weeks. Hiring, the long-term implications around this is hiring remains one of the most important jobs that principals do. Like, this is the capacity for principals to have a deep pool of candidates to work with, to interview, is really pivotal. That's one of the greatest functions that they serve, and we want to make sure that we have a great recruitment base that we're working from. We have to work on some of our partnerships with local institutions. That's been one of the strategies that's been effective in some areas in hiring a diverse teaching population or a representative workforce. This idea about when choices are available to work with BIPOC-owned and operated businesses. This piece is in process. This is, as I shared with a few people, one of the more challenging aspects, because sometimes when we order things, we go with existing vendors that have been vetted and approved. And this, working with our vendors to make sure that we find people that have a social justice resume, as well as working in the region so that other schools are doing the same thing, allows for us to have that information to be shared, that this is an awareness for companies if they're doing business within the region, so that there's kind of a captive audience there, that they would know that this is work that they need to demonstrate their commitment to. We had to examine our RFP processes, though, when we go out to larger bids. We have to make sure that we're including this language in any sort of bids that go out. And in terms of collaborating with the region, we're looking for some long-term planning and outreach to local businesses. We've also looked at other groups like the Chamber of Commerce, and as well as the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, which actually has a significant amount of information that they're starting to share now with companies in Vermont around their commitment to the idea of social justice and equity. In terms of evaluating the successes and failures of remote learning, so we've looked at coaching support, collaborating with families. We've implemented more digital tools such as Remind. Our teachers have been prioritizing the standards to focus on those essential skills and competencies. We've been working with our leadership teams to identify additional supports to those vulnerable populations that might be struggling in order really to increase the intensity, frequency, and duration of contacts. And so there may be some, we've talked as a group about what are our internal processes for finding more supports for kids, and it might look differently and on a case-by-case basis, as well as looking at school-based practices for monitoring student participation and focusing on social emotional learning and benchmarking those social emotional learning factors. You know, the long-term implications of this work, I don't see remote learning going away anytime soon, even if there is a vaccine. I think that remote learning will be with us for a while. So we want to make sure we're developing a coherent long-term instructional framework and aligning those resources with student learning outcomes, and then looking at the differentiated instruction and coaching needs for our staff pre-K through 12. And then ensuring that each school has an organization where students can, BIPOC students can provide each other with the support. This is our school-based diversity and equity teacher leaders have been kind of in the site-based diversity and equity committees have been starting to look at these topics and speaking with some of the administrators that there was a sense that this was going to be primarily a secondary issue, but I want to see if there's room for a level of kind of a diversity clubs within each school so that they can engage in a celebration of diversity at a grade level appropriate times. The diversity and equity teacher leaders have been asked to facilitate student organizations. And as I said before, we're developing that train-the-trainer model to help with coaching skills and facilitation skills. But the long-term implications or planning around this goes back to that continued training of our diversity and equity teacher leaders, and how are we expanding their facilitation skills, as well as the continued definition of student organizations and coherent structures for the site-based committees so that they're aligned with their district goals. I think the last piece around holding ourselves accountable, we need to identify, I've asked our diversity coordinator, Michaela, to help identify a nationally normed survey for long-term tracking purposes. There are a handful of surveys that are out there. Rather than create our own survey and implement it through Google Forms, I'd like to find something that's a nationally normed and referenced survey. And that way we have some indicators to see, well, how well do we stack up? And then use something that we can pick and roll out over a course of 5 to 7 years so that we can track our progress over time. Doing something nationally norm reference, now it gives us a year-to-year comparison with ourselves, but it also gives us a sense of, how do we see ourselves in relationship to the rest of the country and some of the issues and people that they're struggling with or grappling with. I think that's about it for my stuff. I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks.
Yep.
Can I add something?
Yes, go ahead.
This is Michaela. I'm the diversity coordinator, and I agree with especially a lot of the stuff that Andy said, especially in the beginning. I just want to reference that this is a 90-day check-in, but so many of the teacher leaders, at least about half of them, have been members of the Diversity Equity Committee for over 10 years and doing this work without a stipend on a regular. And so even though this is a new system, it's really important to recognize them and that they've been doing this constantly and tirelessly. And it's so important now, and I'm appreciating that it's on everyone's radar in this way and that we're able to talk about it. But it's also important that we add to this, there is a 1-year plan for teacher leaders PD, and soon we'll have orientation for the teacher leaders because some of them are new, teacher leaders for equity and social justice. And they're just really engaged, and they're important pillars in the school building. And it's important that we're connected to each other. And I can send that along to the board if you're interested. In addition, I would like to add, the student groups, having a social justice student group is important, not just for celebration, but also for questioning and for engaging in the critical conversations that are necessary. And the younger we start, the better off we are. And so that these things, although, and we talked about teacher burnout and student fatigue and administrative fatigue, these things may seem really like an additional task, like a heavy lift right now, because there's so much going on. I think that part of my job is to help it not be that way, for us to really make clear plans and not feel the need to rush into things, but really take the time, because we've been slow and steady and we're getting to a really good place. And just to continue on the path that we're on and make sure that we're really building a dedicated student and teacher and family groups that are engaged and wanting to be connected to this work, so that now we're not going at it alone. It's really important that this is not just top down, but it's also happening from the ground up. And I think that that is happening. A lot of families, a lot of people are showing up in their own volition to do this work. And it's kind of challenging because this doesn't lend itself to the asynchronicity that some of other work does, because we are constantly questioning ourselves and needing to engage with each other in order to do it. So I just appreciate all the people really being interested and all the administrators who are putting their foot in it, like, and that's just an expression, but that means they're really like trying to do their best to do it. And I appreciate that, but I would just add to that, that we don't have to rush, that we're all here willing and waiting, and we can just engage with each other. And so that as long as we're moving and we're moving in the right direction, that we're making progress. And so that every conversation that teacher leaders are leading in the schools, that is an action. And we're all moving towards really analyzing our own thoughts, analyzing what we're teaching the kids, because a tool is only as good as the person who's able to use it. So I know, and I'm seeing so much movement. And so I'm just really grateful and happy to be doing this work at this particular moment in history.
Thank you, Michaela. And we would definitely like to see you mentioned a curriculum for the teacher leader, or a curriculum and orientation documents. Did I get that right?
I don't have an orientation document yet, but I will.
Okay, well, yeah, I would love to see those. Love to see those, and I'm really grateful that you're coming to the board's social justice committee meetings, because it's really been helpful. And we had the first report ever, I think, on the board. Well, this board's only been here for 2 years, so the first report for this board, but I think maybe for other boards as well, about your work and about the teacher leaders and about the system that the grassroots work that you're doing. And we'll continue to hear. Hopefully, we can have a report like that every month. So, but yeah, any documents that you have, please forward them, and I'll make sure that at least the Social Justice Committee, if not everybody, sees them. So thank you. Questions from the board around the 90-day update? Tim.
Okay, so there's a goal to review the curriculum over the next 5 or 7 years. What I haven't heard mentioned once in the last 10 minutes is climate change. I don't think that it needs to be discussed separately from social justice and handling the pandemic. I think these issues all go together. So Michaela and Andy, I ask you, in considering where we're going with curricular changes to include social justice, where is climate change in the conversation?
Well, Tim, this was an update around the 90-day update in terms of the board's commitment, and they had charged back in July to set forth a plan in terms of where we were within 90 days and the actions we had taken place. I think, when we look at those items, when I conduct the interviews with all the board members to start gaining some of that initial feedback and information, that's all information that we'll start looking at. How does this play out into a long-term strategic plan and strategic vision for the district? And so one of those questions that I put forward to interview with the board is really kind of how are we what are those things that are important to preserve, and what are those things we need to pursue really within the school system, and what are those mission critical items? That's what I'm looking forward to the conversation we have about that.
Yeah, and Tim,
Can I add to that? I'm sorry.
the climate crisis report is on the agenda for our October 21st meeting. That report that you that we didn't go over, that you just submitted. So that we'll move that in. I think it's important to point out that we see our responsibility as around race, gender, and ability, and marginalization, and combating that marginalization. But this is a specific report around anti-racism and social justice that came up, and it's all part of the work that we need to do. We're not losing sight of that, and the climate specifically will be on the agenda next week, and the week after that, I believe we're going to be hearing from special ed, a really comprehensive report on special ed. So it's in the mix. We just have to get through these meetings to get to those.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
I would say that it's very much been on the Diversity Equity Committee's radar over the years. Typically every year we have a theme, and one year it was water justice, one year it was climate change. We definitely see climate change as a social justice issue. In the spring, one of our second, we had an essential workers panel, and the second was a climate justice panel where we had a climate justice activist from Uganda, and that's on our Facebook page, Speak to the Kids. So we definitely see them as connected. Definitely people of color and other marginalized groups are the most impacted by climate change. So I agree with you that they're very much connected. That's the intersection that's very important.
Thanks a lot, Michaela.
I don't see other board questions right now. I'm going to hold the public questions for just a second. I didn't see a lot of the Office of Diversity and Equity in the plan, Andy. It's a nice comprehensive plan, but I think the teacher leaders were mentioned toward the end, and so I'm the grassroots work that Michaela is talking about. I'm sure it's embedded in there, and is consciousness of it, but it didn't really show up.
It's embedded in there, and the work that we do, it's important to remember the work that we all do is all tied to the essential functions of the school so that students can learn. And so the work with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion is in there, but the work is, when we think about the work, it's all geared towards student learning and student outcomes and student success. And that's so Michaela and I meet weekly. Michaela's meeting with the coaches weekly and the curriculum office. And so that's work those are skill sets and training that we're continuing to focus on developing. She'll be meeting every other week with the diversity teacher leaders and the diversity group to continue that level of coaching around those things. And so they're tied to that work. You wanted the 90-day report from the, what are the things that we're seeing? Obviously the work with Michaela is embedded in that this is the same time where this also operates under a larger, larger systems of change and framework, and where we see things and how things are worked out as clearly as possible.
Great. Have we had any luck finding the part-time additional missing staff person for that?
No, that was Judy. That was a contracted position. That was a contracted service. We haven't found anyone to do that work yet. And
that might be a way to doing an online search might open up some of the avenues that we need to develop to attract diverse candidates as well. Trying to find, trying to expand that search to see if we can't find somebody that would fit in the system right now. I think there are probably a lot of people looking for work, and so much of it could be done remotely now. It would be real. That might be an advantage. But, the other thing about the 90-day plan is I'm hoping the next step, we're going to ask for these for the first meeting every month. An update on the commitment was one of the commitments that we made, and I'd like to see something along the lines that we typically see when we undertake an initiative, which is a matrix that shows the task and the person who's responsible and the timeline and the measures, the methods and the measures that are going to be used to measure the progress. So, to start to get a little more specific about things that are ongoing. There are two things ongoing now. I just wanted to add to this, which didn't really show up in there. One is the, well, it did show up, the expanding the recruitment and using the HR director.
Yep.
And
And that'll start in November.
Right.
That level of work. She's, again, as I said before, she's been in the process of transitioning from EES over to us, onboarding someone there, doing open enrollment, which is going to be a little different this year for the health plans and the HRAs, HSAs, and FSAs, as well as learning the job herself and dealing with the FMLA and the FFCRA requests. So it's been complicated. So that level of work is tremendous. There'll be work that takes place between Stacy. There'll be work that we go through with as administrative team as well, in examining our practices and our approach to recruitment and hiring. And
you also identified a group of teachers that have expressed interest in working on that and supporting that work.
Yep.
And that's all expected to begin in November?
Well, yeah, I think the initial meetings will be in November once we're done with open enrollment.
All right, good, great. And the other thing is that and Thomas may mention that in his committee, well, I'll let Thomas mention it in his committee report. I'm sure he's anxious to do that. Michelle.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I think you said that 7 of the 9 schools have diversity and equity committees at the schools. Is that about right?
Yeah.
So are those primarily just staff and faculty based, or are any of these committees open to school families or bringing in community?
My sense is it's a school-based community because many of the schools will have committees, and they have various different, faculty committees that do different roles at their school. And that's one of the committees that exists in those environments. So typically schools will have those smaller faculty staff-based committees for a variety of functions. And they typically, at least in my sense and my understanding, they haven't been involved with different family members generally. It doesn't mean that they don't, but that means that they can't. So let's just keep David running the meeting. So if we can just not interrupt or jump in, let's let David continue doing the calling on things.
Okay. I think Corey and I really just desperately
can we just leave it to David though, please, since David's facilitating the meeting?
Okay.
Can I add something to that too?
Can we David to David though?
Yeah.
Facilitate, please. Let's go with hands.
Yeah, go ahead, Michaela.
I just want to add that the diversity equity committees have typically been open to parents, and that it's the way that parents have been involved historically at the schools. And I know that a lot of diversity equity committees do involve parents, so that in that way that they're not closed committees. They've historically always been open.
Okay. I would love to see those promoted a little bit within our the school communities. I heard through the grapevine Dummerston has one, but as someone who's been in the school system for 2 years, I've never heard anything about it. And I think I only heard about it here. So I think it would be just wonderful to reach out to our families and let them know that this is something that's available, that they can be part of, and it, expand this mindset and awareness.
I think that would be, and Thomas might want to write that down for the Social Justice Committee. That would be something for us to talk about and request the administration put out a notice and figure out how we'd like to go about that. Mike Zostak.
Yes, thank you. First, I wanted to say, and some of it came out today, but Michaela, I've been in the school system 15 years now, and Michaela has been doing so much, and it's often in the background. A lot of us don't know about it. I know about it because I've become more aware of it working with her, but she's really not. What she has done to keep things going and to try to moving ahead is really not been recognized often. And it started to come out some tonight, and I really appreciate the support she's getting. because she's done a lot of this without real support in the past. And I think it's important to recognize that. And also in our plans, when we talk about plans, short-term plans, long-term plans, I'm not clear as to what, Michaela is one of the few people of color we have in the whole system, whole school system, who's in some kind of a leadership role. And I'm not clear on what her role is in the decisions that get made in our district in terms of both short-term and long-term, and everything you went over today, Andy. So I think it would be helpful, at least to those of us who are involved with this, to understand what Michaela's role is in the overall decision-making and planning process.
So Mike, that's a personnel decision that I'm not going to put anyone else on this right now. And that's a personnel matter that, you know, in all honesty, I'm not going to answer at this time, because it involves a personal conversation. It wouldn't be fair to any of the parties involved right now. It's not a fair question to ask.
Well, I'm sorry you don't take it as a fair question. I do think it's a fair question, but I respect your right to not answer it.
Yeah.
But I would just want to emphasize the importance of having somebody of color in our district who's in a decision-making role. And I'm a white guy, you're a white guy. We need people of color who are a part of the decision-making process.
Yeah, but
that's really critical. And how you
just
do
as
that,
Mike, but
that's
just as I would not share what your role is with the public, nor Frank Rucker's role, nor the particular patterns. I'm looking at just staff on my screen right now. I'm not going to discuss personnel matters with people in terms of their exact specific roles. Michaela is the coordinator for the diversity office. We meet regularly to talk about the plan and what we need to have done to implement the plan with the urgency with the board as they charged us to do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike, for pointing out Michaela's role over the years. You're right, she has been underappreciated, partly because she quietly works in the background getting things done. I also think it's important to point out that the Office of Diversity and Equity is different than pretty much anything else in the district, because the funding for it was voted on at the first annual meeting of the board. And it's a clear representation of the committee's or the community's agreement that we need to have this position, we need to have this work being done. And I think it's generally pretty solidly understood across the district. But Andy is correct to not be talking about the specifics of people and roles out of the context of the organizational structure. Ruby.
Hi, Ruby McAdoo, Putney Central School. I have two things I want to raise, and I guess they're questions, or maybe they're just kind of things to put a pin in. I don't know, but the first is something I've raised before. So the Programmatic Equity Committee won't be surprised. I feel like the issue of aftercare and equity and access to aftercare is something that this district and this board were starting to really tackle, and then the pandemic hit, which made aftercare a full day care. You know, how are we dealing with that? How do people access that? And we've been fortunate to have organizations that have hubs in the area, but I have been kind of sitting on my hands waiting for the moment to say, how are we envisioning this once we go to 4 days, or once we move on into the year? We have an issue of equity related to from school to school, what each school has access to, but then also I think there's an ongoing issue of equity related to funding, and subsidies exist, but there are many people in our district who skirt that subsidy and also don't have it in their budget to pay for additional care on, for example, on a Wednesday, if we have half days. So I'd like to flag that and call it out. I think this board very much, they know me and they know I'm not, this is an issue for me. And it's something that I do intend to keep on the front burner as much as possible. So I'm flagging it not because I think that, Andy, you have some answer, but because I do think it's important. And the second point actually kind of speaks to what Michelle raised. In Putney, we have had a diversity and equity committee. I think it's been called the diversity committee. And I've had kind of parent involvement with that minimally in the past, but for the most part, it's been a staff committee. And I've reached out this year about parent involvement and how can I be involved. And what I'm hearing from our committee is much more what how you framed it, of it's a staff, it's essentially for staff development and thinking about equity and inclusion from a staff perspective. And they're considering how and what parent involvement looks like. And I appreciate that they're doing that. I want to raise it as something that in your looking at the long-term planning, I did see some amount of community engagement that was really focused on kids and staff. And within Putney, we've just gone through, and we're still going through a lot of turmoil in our town. The town voted to and did write or put Black Lives Matter on our road right outside of the school. That's caused a lot of discussion. And I want to see ways to involve our greater community in the work that's happening at the school and an understanding of equity and inclusion that's happening at the school. And I'd like to see, I know we're talking about leadership, you are talking about leadership council stuff later, but I didn't see the leadership councils as kind of a bullet point item in your presentation. And I would love to see that be a goal of how do we create engagement within our community. I don't know that the leadership councils are the answer. I don't think we should put all our eggs in that basket, but I think that some way to prioritize not just staff engagement around equity inclusion, not just student and curricular, but parents, families, and the greater community.
Great. Thanks, Ruby.
Thanks, Ruby. Andy, you don't have the answer? Michaela?
I appreciate that. Thank you, Ruby, too. I want to say that there is a balance on the committee and that parents definitely, I think this is such a challenge when to make sure that the teachers have a space where they can talk freely. And so I can imagine where there might be some meetings that might not be available to parents, but others that might be. So I think that there might be a structure that, depending on the school, that might need to be in place to facilitate that possibility. But there are parents that attend every meeting. So depending on the school.
We'll work on getting a list to probably not this week's update to families, but perhaps the next week. We'll see if we can pull that together for everyone. Which schools have parents on the committees and which schools have opportunities to do that or those times that would do so. We'll work on pulling all that together.
Thank you. Emily?
So just wanted to respond to Ruby's first point, which is about after school care. As many of you know, the programmatic, the Performance and Programmatic Equity Committee was doing a lot of work around after school programming and after school care. And in August, we had made a decision, just because everything was about how are we reopening schools, that it didn't make sense at that moment to be asking administrators to go deep in after school care because we were just getting school care up. But we did talk to Andy and kind of as a committee and thought that we would have this topic resurface in October. So it may make sense, I'm just saying here is on our next meeting's agenda, I'll plan to put this on as a topic just to revive a little bit, and then we can kind of create some next steps. So I wanted to put that out there in case some people wanted to join that meeting.
Thanks, Emily. Other comments on any of the administrative report? Okay, we will move on to the fiscal report. Frank, you have some new information for us?
Sure, here we go. So what I thought would be helpful is, David, I'm assuming maybe 15 minutes or so is enough airtime on the topic. I know we can lose sight of the relevance when we go into the weeds too deeply, but yeah, and David, if you can set me up again to share screen.
I believe you should be able to do it already.
Okay. What I thought I would do, this is a continuation of where we were at our last meeting. I thought I would start with just a kind of a refresher of the outline of what we are charged to do in terms of capturing information, around all of these great programs that we've just been discussing. So the objective of my sharing here is to connect, the board and its awareness of the resources, where they are, how we account for them, and how do we connect them to all of these programs that we've been discussing this evening, and again, as we enter into the budget development planning cycle, how do we access the financial information that we are interested in measuring, and obviously telling the story, sharing that story with our community and our public ultimately as we head down to a budget vote. So I assume everyone can see this document. It's a document that we started with last week. I just wanted to remind you that the great state of Vermont has created essentially a coding system for recording financial information. Here's the summary that we are working through. I'm on this expenditure description, and we talked last week about a fund level, which was the balance sheet, and that's where you're talking about general fund, capital fund, endowment fund, and so on. So we spent a little time on that. I provided the board, and it's on the website from last week, summary information by location. So we have our different school sites. Academy School, Brattleboro Union, Green Street, and so on. So we looked at information just aggregated by site on one page, the $50 million budget on one page by location or site. I thought we would spend a little more time today on level, and then as we work through and time permits, we need to work through all of these segments of the account code. And when we get through the discussion of all the segments of the account code, you should be able to feel very comfortable in reading the financial information that we'll be all sharing, developing. You'll be able to, ask for subsets of information, maybe at the program level, grade level, at the function level, and so on. So as we go through this discussion, this should help you feel comfortable with navigating the details of how we essentially fund all of these programs that we've been discussing. So here we go. One more very quick sort of refresher. This is where we left off. Here's the general fund revenue and expenditure for the whole system that represents the fiscal year end June 30th, 2020, and it's what we're going through the audit process right now. I'm meeting with the auditors. They're in the office this week. Just as a quick recap, you remember we just talked about sites, location. Here it is. This is how we categorize each school within the Windham Southeast School District, 48 million, with the 277,000 favorable difference between revenues and expenditures. So when we start the budget process, this is one of those very fundamental numbers that a board wants to know as to, are we dealing with entering the new fiscal year planning process with a surplus or a deficit or essentially a break even? And the good news for us is that we had a favorable fiscal year end. In a snapshot, you get that on one page, and you get sort of the magnitude of how much activity is at each one of our schools. You see, ranging from 15 million at the high school to one of our smaller schools at Guilford at 2.1 million. So that was our discussion last meeting. I mentioned we also talked about the balance sheet. So here is the focus on funds, general fund, early ed, capital fund. We have a small building trades fund out of the Career Center, the endowment fund, and our student activity funds. So we spent some time on that. I'm glad to revisit any of that if folks wanted to take some time. But our main focus today was to go through the next level of these account segments. So I'm going to bounce around just a little bit, but as I just said, we've talked about fund, we've talked about location, or I've been using the word site, and now I want to talk about levels and programs. Okay, in terms of how we organize financial information so that it's available, to the board, to the public, to the administrator, to the teacher, to the great state of Vermont Agency of Ed, any entity that's interested in our public educational, essentially transparent book of record. So this is the format. Hopefully it's somewhat familiar to you. It's the format that this board has agreed to share in our annual report. So we've now published the fiscal year 20 budget in our annual report, and most recently, as of June 30th of 2020, we presented the FY21 budget. It was in this format. This document represents the actual fiscal year end for June 30th that's being audited right now. So this is I think it's a 7-page document. Yeah, a 7-page document. Just get your bearings. Here's that same $48 million result. This is just the spending side of the budget, not the revenue side. And here's the connection to what I was giving you as an overview. The whole data set is organized around the general operating fund. And it is also organized by location first. So as we scroll through this, and as we did in our annual report with our public, we present information by school, okay? And then, but the more detail, the other report I showed you was the whole school was on one number. Now this is a report that is broken out by program, and then by level, and then by function. So I wanted to help you understand when we organize information by program, we are organizing it around regular education, special education, after-school programming, athletic programs, non-athletic programs, and so on. I will hop back here to this document that's on the website that I've shared with you. That here's all of the programs that are defined by the Agency of Education that we have to use. So you see, when we were looking at that financial report, we're looking at program 11, regular education. You know, just hopping around again right here. See, regular education. That's where that comes from. That's by far where most of the money is, and most of our pages of financial data are in the regular education group. We have academic summer school, a very, very small part of what we do in terms of our 48 million, but we do capture information that way. We capture the 21st century as a separate program. After school programs, as I said, food service, you won't really see that in the SD, you'll see that in the SU. Then we also have special education programs and vocational programs you see here. As I scroll down this document, again, you have this on the website. We have adult ed is a program that you'll see in our financial reports. Athletic activities, program 91, okay, and then non-athletic program 92. So those are the programs that we organize information around and we share with our public. So coming back to the annual report, and now this is the first time you're seeing this document. It's the fiscal year end of June 2020 in the same format as our annual report that I'm sharing with the auditors. So here we are with our regular education programs, and this is taking all grade levels, you know, pre-K through, in academy schools case, it's through grade 6, and giving you a total here. Regular education at academy, the budget was 6.3 million. We spent 6.2 million. We had a favorable variance of 100,000. In our academic summer program, remember, said if you have the photographic memory, you would see that, you know, there's the 12. That's from the state document. It's only a $10,000 program. We spent 18,000. You know, sometimes you say, oh, geez, you overspent your budget. Well, in this case, much of that comes from Paul Smith being able to increase the Title I budget, and that's often the case for why we spend more than the original plan. Other programs you see here, after school programs, budget of 45,000, and we spent 23. I know you know, and as we've spoken before, we did not spend a lot of our after school program money because of the pandemic, and things shut down. You know, when they were, you know, had previously been scheduled. Food service program, there it is, 15. This is the subsidy that the SD sends to the SU. The state is requiring the SU to run the food service program, so that's academy schools' contribution to the program. And here's our non-athletic, 14,000 for those kind of school programs. So, you know, our objective here is primarily get you familiar with the format of the financial reports and how you can ask for information, how we're required to capture information, and then it certainly allows us to analyze trends and priorities and you know, accountability for results against a plan. So I'll just kind of quickly go through the rest of the schools here just to see there is some variation from school to school when you capture information at different program levels. But here's the high school where we have coming down to the total regular ed program, 15 million spent 14 out of a $15 million budget. So a favorable variance there. But again, you see academic support program, very small portion that's outside of the regular. This is academic summer, summer school, very much a small part of our core programs, as well as the rest, sort of, very redundant in terms of financial information and the way it's presented intentionally. This is all heading toward the state's ability to look at school spending across all of Vermont and then draw conclusions about, what seems to be associated with successful schools and how might we learn from each other to replicate success. There we are with the athletic activities for our over 1,000 kids, the 638,000 budget. Again, pandemic sort of shut down some of those activities that created a favorable budget variance there. Non-athletic, we have many non-athletic programs at the high school, which is much more common than at the elementary level. And there's our overall results. So we are looking at information organized by school and then subtotaled by program. And I have not talked about function, but you can see it is organized after site, program, and then by function. So here's our Dummerston regular ed, slightly unfavorable, 1%. That's not a very significant variance in direct instruction and so on. Overall, a 1% variance. And Guilford, quite favorable, and this is for that anomaly here where the budget was developed using the old assumptions around potentially not being a unified system. You remember that? And we had $380,000 in direct instruction that was a tuition payment to BAMS. But of course, once the state board settled our organizational structure, that didn't occur. So that's what accounts for that favorable variance there. That might ring a bell. We've talked about that before. Here we are overall in Guilford, favorable, almost exactly associated with that $380,000 tuition payment that never had to be made. Putney, similar scenario. Putney actually a little larger variance. This is somewhat uncommon, to be more than a 2-3%. And but we know what this was. It's primarily having to add the second grade teacher because of an enrollment increase that occurred after we had passed the budget. But there again, we're focusing on how we organize financial information and present it. So there's the elementary. Here's the BAMS, and by the way, the sequence of these numbers is not something I would have created, but the state assigned these site numbers, and that's what's sequencing the numbers. 1367 is the Brattleboro area middle school. The state assigned that number, and then they assigned 1383 to Oak Grove. I'm not sure how they came up with that, but we have to live with that because we report all of this data back to the agency of ed. So I've given you sort of a pretty quick review, and the intent here is to get you familiar with location, program, level, and the function codes. So I think that, maybe I should mention this. 3096 is obviously not a school. What it is it's where you have a group of costs that are equally, or not necessarily equally, but intended to be shared by all schools. And in this case, there are just basically two types of cost, or three types of cost in this group. There's the diversity program that actually just spent a fair amount of time talking about. The diversity also became there was no budget for COVID, but some of these expenses include COVID because, again, they were a universally consumed resource. We have the school board in the 3096 district-wide. Everybody gets the benefit of the school board services, and then it's the same thing for the supervisory union assessments for services. So I try to keep as few costs out of 3096, the district-wide, because I think it's always helpful to associate costs at a school site, so we have a good sense of the equitable use of resources. But in some instances, it's just not designed to do that like a school board cost. So once again, coming down to our total here, fiscal year end, we had a favorable 3.5% variance from the plan, contributing that 277,000 to fund balance, which is going to be a very helpful resource for us as we move forward. So next meeting, I would share more on the object code, type and object code. Object code is the salary, benefit, professional service level. So there's a lot of detail in that structure. And I know tonight would not be a good night to continue that discussion, but I'll have a document like this spreadsheet that the state has prepared that's probably 3 pages long of object codes. And that's where things start to get far more complex. The last thing I'll leave with you on what I thought might be useful is this is the detail level of what we were just talking about. This is a 49-page report, and it's the same information. It's just every account that is active in our accounting system. This 49 pages of data rolls up into this 7-page report, which is the same information as this, which rolls up into a 1-page report. It's all the same information. It's just a matter of how you organize it. And generally people are able to absorb, a 1 or 2 or 3 or even a 10-page financial statement, but it's very difficult for most folks to absorb a 50-page financial statement. However, this is on the website, by the way. Just as we did with the annual report, we made these references, page number references. So if you wanted to know in any school, where does this stuff come from? Like I'm just randomly picking Oak Grove, and you wanted to know what is the detail behind this 2.4 million? Well, just go to page 34 through 37 of this detail report, and you will get that information. I'll just do that right now, just so you get that connection.
And Frank, when you get there, would you also just kind of, I'm not sure, I think you probably made it clear, but it keeps coming to me that these numbers that you're showing us, the fund and the location and the level and that's what these numbers, these 20 or so digits across here, that's where those numbers go. And that
That's
sequence
right.
tells you, yeah, so maybe just go through a few of those. I know that's on the sheet you're going to give us later where it breaks it all down, but just to sort of the relationship between that and the 4 concepts that you've just shared in the last 2 meetings.
Good. I think I understood the question. So
I hope so.
I think so, but correct me if I am wrong. So the location code is this thing right here, 1383. See that? And And back here, here's the 1383. And then coming back to this document, it goes in this sequence. David, see, you know, it starts with fund and then it goes location and then it goes level. So the 1383 goes right here. Okay. And the fund is fund 1 and the level is 11. I'm sorry, the level is grade 1-1, which represents elementary, and program is 11, which is regular education. So,
So that's what we see on that page.
That's what you see on that page, and these are the definitions of all of those things. Here, you see, here's the level. I just said elementary is 11. And program is here, 11. Also, it's unfortunate the state chose the same code for 2 different elements, but they did. And then the school codes are all listed on this document. You know, this document right here. You see, here's 1383. Here's Oak Grove. So I try to organize information at a summary level that's almost like a table of context for you, you know, so you can get familiar with one summary document and make your way through a more detailed level. So to come back to your point, David, we go from Oak Grove, regular ed, grade level. Now I've summarized grade level because it's all elementary, so I didn't put in 11 here. I just said, you know, and I'm asking the database to create this report for me. But then when we come down to the detail, here it all is. It's our fund 1, it's our location 1383, which is Oak Grove. It's 01 is preschool. So we come back here, you see under grade level, preschool is 01, okay? So that's that. And then here we go with 11 is now meaning regular education, okay? Because that's the program. I haven't talked about this digit. We'll get to that next time.
Right.
I've talked about this group right here. This is called this account segment. That's called the function. And the function is defined, again, on this document. Here's all the function codes. Direct instruction is your 1000s. And your 2000s are student support services, you know, guidance and health, and so on. So I didn't want to put everybody to sleep, but we're getting into, this is, unfortunately, there's no way around the fact that if you want to understand a financial statement, you do have to get comfortable looking up these reference tables. And then when you get comfortable with a particular area, then, you know, it's good to try to absorb another, you know, level of information. So I didn't want to go beyond that tonight, which is, we did pretty well here. We talked fund, we talked sites, we talked grade level, we talked the program level, and we've talked about function. I thought at our next meeting, we could tackle some of the other segments. There are 9 segments in the account structure, and we've talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So we're halfway there. So that's what I thought would be useful. As I said, I did send these to Barb late in the afternoon. I was working on them right up till 5 o'clock. So they are on the website. So you can access this information, and it is what I'm engaging the auditors with over the next week or 2. And I would expect this data to be largely the same when we're done the audit. There may be a couple of adjusting entries, but I wouldn't expect too much different.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for again mentioning that one of the reasons we do this is because it allows us to compare or look at where where somebody might be doing something more efficiently or more cost effectively than someone else. It also allows us to look at things and look at how much our health insurance costs or how much we're spending on any of those items
That's right.
across the system instead of trying to add it up with a pen and paper, with pencil and paper.
That's
So it's
right.
really-
Speaking to that, very good point. Next meeting, that's where we get into object codes, something like health
Right.
insurance. And I can type in, or, I can type into the software, give me all of the code 2, whatever it is. I think it's code 219, I think, I forget what it is, but, and now the whole organization will come up and it'll be like $6 million, or you can say, well, just give it to me at the elementary level, and so we can manipulate data, obviously all for the purpose of trying to understand, are we properly resourcing our programs and are we accountable for good results, over time, and how do we compare to other similar size schools with similar conditions, with poverty and special ed and so on. David, I wasn't anticipating too many questions. I'm happy to take them, but I did want to take a moment. It's totally related. See if I can do that share screen.
Yes.
And just talk about the budget timeline. Obviously it's related. I'm not expecting an in-depth discussion about it because it's not really on the agenda, but I was going to get this document on the website as well, which is just a glimpse of what would be a typical budget development timeline, and it's totally draft, but I wanted to just have this on folks' radar. October 7 is tonight, just the fact that we're talking about a budget timeline. The next week, the special education component of FY22, that's July of 21 through June of 22. That's the budget we'll be planning. That is due to the Agency of Ed next week. We'll take that information internally, and I'll work with the administration and obviously Andy to start discussions about the regular ed, and to whatever extent special ed has implications for regular ed. We'll have that information available to us. And then early November, we typically, revisit our strategic plan, our action plans, the CIP, what's that, continuous improvement plans, and, and the discussions that you've been having throughout the last several months at the board level. And we inform our assumptions around programs that need to be refined for the proposal, with a intent to have a draft board version on that early December. I think that's the first meeting in December, and the significance of that date, as we did last year, is it's the day after the state supposedly gives us our equalized numbers. It's always problematic to have a public budget draft before the state gives us equalized student numbers, because if it's substantially different than the prior year, it is very problematic to have those kinds of adjustments to be made in a relatively short period of time. So as an aside, very good news, I believe, that Andy referred to. The legislature seems to have looked forward and said, we're going to hold equalized student data harmless, meaning if our number comes out less than the current budget, they're not going to use that number. They're going to use at least the prior year, which is, it brings a lot of stability in. But anyways, there's the brief look. I'll put this on the website, and the end game is a public vote in March 16, and that dictates, warnings and public information meetings, as nothing new there. And then from there, it triggers a variety of other, kind of key events. So I just wanted to mention, obviously, it is connected to the whole financial reporting and planning, and I think that's all I had.
Thank you. We're gonna be well prepared. I was gonna say when the time comes, but as you just showed us, it's here. So we're preparing at the right time. So thank you. Are there any questions for Frank? I think as the process goes along and we start looking at draft budgets, the value of this will be much more apparent. But it's really helpful to have this background, even though it'll move around in our memories between meetings. I think when we start sitting down looking at all this, it'll all come together and have been very helpful. So thank you. Questions for Frank? Wow them again.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Next is committee reports. And the first thing is to review the Leadership Council policy. So I'm going to bring that up on our screen in a moment. And we will have a look at go over the policy, which, let's see, oh, I need to undo that and go to that. Okay, here we are. I hope that is on everyone's screen and readily apparent. And the reason I wanted to go over this is because this isn't just a policy that we need to be familiar with. It's a policy that was voted by, it wasn't in our articles, the articles that the state board assigned to us when they settled the outstanding unmerged districts question a couple of years ago. And so the board that was elected, the first of the district boards, wrote this policy, or wrote an article and put it in front of the voters. And just before we closed the schools in March, the communities voted and they overwhelmingly supported, including this Leadership Council's article in our articles, so that it's a level of seriousness and a level of importance that requires the entire community to vote in order to change it. It's not something that that is in a book and we sort of look at it and tune it up or change it or ignore it or disregard it. It's really crucial, and it's not just that elected board, the first elected district board, but also the committee that developed the articles of agreement to merge that the voters didn't support, and the committee that voted the articles for an alternative governance structure, which the Agency of Education didn't support. Both included leadership councils in their proposals, and this is very much reflects that. And the policy committee, the amendment and policy committee last year worked for the entire time right up to the warning of the meeting or the warning of the vote to refine this and to really try and iron the nuts and bolts out and get it in place so that it could be so we could start developing the councils. And by the end of the first year, I think every school had one. They hadn't necessarily met yet, but they were able to get a structure together. And this is obviously not a convenient time to be doing these kinds of things. But so the structure was developed and we're pretty much in place. And now we need to have a look at it and see and go over and just revisit for the board, for the administration, for the parents and community members that are on these councils, and for the teachers that have volunteered to be on these councils, so that it's really clear what's intended here. It's not meant to be a replacement for PTOs. It's not meant to. It's meant as a structure to make sure that the communities that lost representation by having their local school boards combined into a district board still have voice and still have the opportunity to participate in the operation of their schools, to influence that. And there, it's clearly stated in the very beginning that these councils are advisory. And I should have highlighted, it's not too late, since I have this little button here, I can highlight that right now. The purpose is to ensure community input, and they are advisory, but that doesn't in any way diminish their importance. The membership, again, I'm just going to go through this and read these highlighted things, and then I'll answer questions, or people can comment about how theirs are going, and then we'll hear the Leadership Council updates and the rest of the committee reports. Community members need to be 50% of the membership of Leadership Council. Committee members are nominated in the Leadership Council to the Leadership Council by other community members. School staff will nominate staff members to Leadership Councils. They're not handpicked by anyone. The communities are asked, and the staff are asked to choose people from among them to represent them. The council, once it's organized, shall elect a chair and a clerk and establish a regular meeting time and location. Future meeting agenda, a procedure for publishing the agendas will be established, and that has been established in the process. The principals know that process is to send the information to Barb, and she makes sure that all of the open meeting law, all the open meeting law requirements and warning requirements are met. The next is the meeting procedures. Agendas need to be posted 48 hours prior to the meeting. The open meeting law, Robert's Rules of Orders, and confidentiality laws. The principal is asked to assure that the council follows those rules, since the principals are by professional requirement familiar with these and can provide the guidance in that area. And minutes for every meeting shall be posted on the school website and at the school. Very similar to board meetings. The business of the council, and this I think is the key, and this is what we spent, I think, the most time as the amendment and policy committee, the most time last year developing, is the responsibilities of the council, the business of the council. And the council's, this is important, the council interest guides the responsibilities. What the things that these councils find important are the things that they should be taking up, and that's meant to protect the unique culture in each of our communities. At the same time, these are district-wide structures, and they need to follow the structure and consider these in particular these business items. One is supporting community engagement activities, communicating the community's values and expectations to the board, helping develop the school-based goals for student learning, helping review student learning needs and progress measures, the assessments that we use, helping review and understand those, assisting in the initial budget development, reviewing priorities, resource priorities, which refers to the budget development as well, providing feedback on policies and procedures beyond the coming to a board meeting and generally commenting on the items in the meeting. This is meant to be the policies and procedures in the school at that really basic community level. To provide input into hiring processes. We'll be talking a lot more about hiring processes as this year goes on and the work of identifying a broader range of candidates goes forward. Supporting school and district communication, communicating to the school district, to the board, but also back to the community, the things that are happening in the school. Providing input on learning initiatives, grading curricular priorities are some of the things we listed. There are many other initiatives. Each school has unique initiatives that are underway, and providing community input on the effect of those and on the value of those, and how well they align with the values of the community. Coordinating local school committees and organizations, other things that you agree upon, and responding to requests for information from the unified board, from the district board. So those, again, I just wanted to go over again the structure of it, the sort of the formal structure, and then the business of the council. And I'll leave this up for a minute and ask if there are any questions from the board or administrators. Well, in this case, anyone really, because it's about leadership councils and that's everybody. So any questions on this? Again, I don't know that we ever specifically articulated this, and I'm not sure that all leadership councils had this background, so I wanted to share that. Michelle?
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I wanted to revisit a conversation that we had back in August. I know when the Communication Council first came together, this was one of the areas that we felt like really needed improvement. This is a way to connect our schools and branch communication between the board and the individual communities. And it seems like each leadership council that has even formed they just look really different. I know Andy we had mentioned, and Andy seems supportive of the idea of having like a leadership council summit where we bring them together and kind of also review this and give some guidance on the potential that the leadership councils have, so that I see some of these leadership councils, it was former town Board of Ed members for their own town kind of shifted into these roles, and other communities they're stepping in, and it is sort of taking on sort of maybe some PTO kind of mentality. And so I'm just wondering what we could do to support this information to all of the leadership councils and to encourage their development. And Andy, maybe I don't know if you've been very busy, but maybe, do you remember mentioning that you were game for a leadership council?
I do remember that. And I do think as we've started talking about the weaving in of a strategic plan, I think that the leadership councils are really going to be a pivotal role, especially in terms of what are those unique elements of our community and our region that we want to capture in a long range vision for the district. So the prominence of leadership councils really moves forward in terms of really that advisory role. That advisement is so critical around the things that we hold near and dear that we want to capture, maintain, and enhance. So I do remember the conversation. In a typical year, August would be just like that, but it seems like August was 8 years ago at this point.
Isn't it amazing? It seems like March was 5 years ago. And it seems like we've been at this job for several years and we're not even halfway through the year. But I just added that to the calendar. Next place we have a gap is in February, shortly after we finish the budget maybe. But we will talk about putting together ways, and we'll have had a few more months of experience with the leadership councils and with this information, see how they change, possibly by reviewing this policy and having a closer look at it. And we're going to be going through budget development, so that'll draw some or focus some of the efforts as well. But we'll have a reflection in February and see about having a council summit to share best practices and
I think I'd feel encouraged if I knew that all of our administrators were sort of on the same page and would help convey some of this information back to their school's leadership council. Maybe that's just a simple way to help this along before February.
I think that's a great idea. We'd ask Andy to make sure the policy goes out. It's on the agenda, so they already have it. But to maybe share that with the council members if they have all the emails. Great, thanks, Michelle. Other questions? Ruby?
Ruby McAdoo. I was recently appointed chair of the Leadership Council at PCS. And I have two kind of comments, and one is procedural and one's a little bit meatier. I hadn't looked at this policy in a long time, and we're all dealing with an annual appointment process in terms of getting a slate of people that want to serve. And I think it'd be great if it was articulated a little bit more clearly. I had thought maybe in an earlier draft, the principal was the one who kind of presented people to the board. I think that's what in practice has been happening, but it really doesn't look like it looks on paper like community members nominate community members and staff nominates staff, which has a much more direct line to the board in terms of nominating someone than I feel like has been in practice. And so
Yeah, let me quickly
that
just,
process and so
let me
understanding
quickly
that
just
process would be better.
interrupt you for a second.
Mhm.
We recognize that, and somewhere along the line, and I'll find the document where it got recorded, but the question about how do people get appointed? Because it is an official functioning board, and so the board has to appoint them. So basically, what we asked was that the principal that those people would communicate their interest to the principal, and the principal would bring the nomination to the board.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
that is the proper structure.
Right.
Because
It's just
because
not
we had to set it up.
spelled out. Got
It's
it.
not in the policy, and we haven't, because we can amend the policy, but we can't amend the article. It may be in the article, but I believe it's recorded somewhere. And
Gotcha.
I'll find it and get it together.
So that, and then the thing that has come up at the Putney, the PCS Leadership Council recently, we approved a vision mission statement for our leadership council, which we're going to revisit and try to, just periodically revisit. But in the course of that, one of the things that came up was the staff and administration on the leadership council, the question of values, and the leadership council being involved in identifying values, communicating values in any way to the community was, I don't want to speak for Herv, and Herv's not here, but what came up is that the continuous improvement plan of the school is what the leadership team of the school uses to drive values conversations and do a lot of the kind of values work within the school. And so it just felt a little bit like maybe we can develop a way in which the leadership team and the continuous improvement plan are going in lockstep with the leadership council, but ultimately it felt a little bit like, did we just create two different arms that are doing not the same thing, not even remotely the same thing, but are meant to inform something very similar, or the values that go into the budget, for example. And so I just kind of raised that because I don't understand the CIP, like the continuous improvement plan. It's awesome that exists, but it's not something I've ever been involved in, and I've never really looked at it. And so I just want to call that out as maybe someone who knows those things better and understands this policy and the leadership councils as a whole and their purpose, maybe having them integrated or understanding how they relate to each other better and articulating it.
I'm going to quickly make a note about that. Thank you, Ruby. Other questions? Sean, or is that Emily? Sean, I think.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are we going to also have a leadership council report? Or we're discussing now the policy review.
Right.
Are we going to have a report also?
Yes. Yeah, we still have all our committee reports to do.
Yeah, okay. Should I start by doing Guilford's?
Well, let's see if there are any more questions or any more comments specifically about the policy, and then we'll go right down the line. That would be great. Liz.
Yeah. I'm just going to hit it head on because I don't want to beat around the bush anymore. Essentially, at Putney Central, when we've asked what can the leadership council do to help the school, volunteers, maybe providing some support after school, we run into a brick wall. There is no sharing back and forth like I see at all the other elementary leadership councils. We've got it covered. You guys do that. And that was typical of the whole year that I was on it. I missed the last meeting by a fluke, but I think, these are so important, and that's why, as David pointed out, that both the merger committee and the alternative governance structures both wanted these included in a plan, but in Putney, we have literally hit a brick wall. All we have gotten is, get the pizza pavilion built and work on an outdoor classroom in the school forest. But that's not what the intent of these is, and I don't know how to address it, and I don't think I can. I think that needs to come from elsewhere, but I think that, Ruby could say basically the same thing. So I'm going to leave that on you guys' plate.
The only suggestion off the top of my head is to bring the policy to the next meeting and talk about that before, in terms of what you're talking about, and see if those things that are suggested are on your agenda.
I'm willing to do that one more time, but only once, because it's come up repeatedly.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, Sean, would you like to start the Leadership Council reports process for us?
I would, David. Yes, thank you. The Guilford Leadership Council met on October 2nd. And on the agenda, the main item of business was to try to discover and implement ways to form a sense of community in the Guilford School between hybrid and remote students, which has been, had some bumps in the road. So I think there were about 10 people in attendance. And John Gagnon, once again, was an excellent leader. In addition to which, I was looking over what we just reviewed, and I was a little nervous about the 50% community members. So I sent that to our chair and our vice chair of the Leadership Council, and they assured me there are 4 staff and 6 parents on the Guilford Leadership Council. So it works, it follows. I was a little worried about some other leadership councils that didn't have that compliance to those numbers. And what would you do? Here you have a group that's working extremely well in any school. And if it doesn't meet the compliance requirements that were laid out in the amendment, it would be too bad to disrupt it from on high. But anyway, the Guilford Leadership Council, it's almost like giving somebody a pair of skis in the amendment, and then the feeling that you get with a first run down and how it feels to be on skis. And that's the Guilford Leadership Council. It's been very successful and it's been fun. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Other councils that met in the last 3 weeks? Ruby?
The PCS Leadership Council met on the 1st of October, and we discussed change of leadership, as I mentioned. So Jamie Contois was the chair, and she identified that she wanted to pass the baton, and so she did. And we discussed recruitment, specifically also the kind of call to engage Black, Indigenous, people of color, families of color. And I don't think we came to any strong conclusions there, but we just called that out as something as a priority. There is an equity inclusion book group that we're co-sponsoring. We're about to have our 2nd book group, and that's really exciting in terms of connecting to our community. As I mentioned, and as this board knows, the Black Lives Matter mural was painted outside of the school. It was a very successful event. It produced some beautiful photographs that a PCS parent, Justin Altman took, and that was a big part of our conversation. But I also think that it can be a heavy issue, and it can be a complicated issue at a curricular level in terms of our community and people's opinions about what kind of curriculum and what kind of discussion happens around Black Lives Matter. So we didn't go into that in depth, but it was kind of acknowledged. We approved a mission and vision statement that will, I think, hopefully at some point go up on the PCS website. At this point, it's being brought back to the leadership team of PCS to kind of share it with them so that they understand it. That was one of the things in our vision mission statement had to do with values and our role in identifying them and communicating with our community about them. And that was part of where having the leadership team and having the staff and faculty understand that vision and that mission and what the purpose of the Leadership Council is, I think is a part of what Herb would like to see happen. So it may be that it takes a little bit of time for us to get that up and running on the website, but hopefully that will be soon. We're working on a meeting cycle that will hopefully be able to be at a time that's outside of working hours so that we can engage working parents more. And I also would like to have it more frequently every 2 weeks rather than every month, just so that we can have some consistency in the work that we're trying to develop. I did have some communication with Herb, and so his suggestion, which I think is a good one, is we may alternate and have, one of our meetings a month be during the day, so it's better for teachers, and another meeting of the month be in the evenings, and so it's easier for working families. But that's yet to be determined. And I think I would just like to, Liz did kind of raise an issue that I wanna agree with her in lots of ways. I think we've been spinning our wheels a little bit with PCS Leadership Council. We've had active involvement, but in the past few months, we only have 2 staff left on the Leadership Council, and we're down to 4 community members with really very little prospects of growth. And the 2 issues I see there, one is that at PCS, the staff requirements in terms of their workload is different than at every other school. And I see this, it's a struggle for the staff to find the time to commit to something like this Leadership Council when they are already struggling with their day-to-day things. And then in terms of community, we've been considering for a while, not really actively, but it's been on the plate, starting some like a Facebook presence or something so that we have a direct way to communicate with the public. Especially with the pandemic, it's not, there's so much coming from the school and from Herb that it feels like these are my words, not hers. It feels like a lot and a burden to ask him to adequately express what the Leadership Council wants to express around recruitment and what we are and things like that when there's so much going on that he needs to express. So I'm sorry to take up a lot of time, but it was a really, I think I would not say that it was without frustration the past few meetings, because it has felt difficult and hard to unpack what we are and who we are and how we serve our community. But I'm hopeful with the change in leadership. I think that Herb and I can hopefully work well together. And he and I are going to be connecting in that next week or so, directly, just him and I, about like how can we improve kind of the relationship that we have in terms of how we kind of work together through the Leadership Council. So I'm hopeful, but I also I hear Liz, and I don't disagree with her that there's frustration around how we've worked. That's all.
Thanks, Ruby. This and the Leadership Council Summit reminder has got me writing things down, like video meetings so that the people that can't watch during work hours can watch the ones they run anyway. And also sharing of mission and visions that get developed. And then we talking about how to recruit and also how to communicate. So those are all topics that I'm going to keep track of those so that when we get to that, we've got a good list of jobs to do. Michelle.
All right. Dummerston met on October 1st as well. And it's funny to go next because it almost shows a little bit of the disparity between what different groups could be doing. Our leadership council is such a wonderful group of really dedicated people that are working so hard to make Dummerston the best school it can be and serve the needs of our kids as best as they can be. It's not a competition or anything, but we basically, our entire meeting was just really focused on how do we fundraise? How do we get winter supplies for our kids? You know, there is no philosophy conversation. It's really about meeting the needs of the students. And so at this particular meeting, we did, I don't know if I'm sure I'm going to put this in the back of everyone's mind, but the Performance and Programmatic Equity Committee had done a presentation back last spring, and Dummerston spends less by far on per student for recreational use than any other school in the district. I think they came in at about $45 per student, where other schools were, $500 to $800 per student. And it shows. And so these are people who have just putting blood, sweat, and tears and money out of their own pocket into bettering our resources, and taking a dated and now disassembled playground and trying to create something for our kids and just provide the needs. And so it's just been a lot of people's personal time trying to make the school function. And that's mostly what we've talked about is just focusing on clothes drives and winter gear drives, and how can we pool more money, and how can we bring our community in and make it a community effort to support our kids and not just the parents in the school, because it does feel like a very small community trying to better our environment. And then, as always, Joanne always does a really good job giving us our school update and covering where we're at with COVID and how things are going and what's going on with our building, and is it holding together, little things like the calendar and open house. But yeah, definitely a big difference in the priorities that our group is focused on.
It shows you it's really a good idea to have these councils, because these communities are so different, and they're different at different times. I mean, it's entirely possible the things you're doing will happen in one of the other schools later on in the season, and that the question about Black Lives Matter and the curriculum in the schools will come up somewhere else, somewhere along the line. So we'll be able to share that experience and that information.
They're definitely doing what they need to do right now. And
yeah, I don't know if people have had a chance to see the video of the bike trail that was created over the summer, but that's a really excellent example of community work.
Chopping trees down. It was an amazing gift to our community.
Thanks, Michelle. Other Leadership Council reports that met in the last 3 weeks. There's Emily.
So I unfortunately was unable to make the Academy School Leadership Council meeting, but they did have a meeting, and I noticed that Kelly has stepped off of this meeting probably to tend to her own little one. But maybe we'll just report on it next time.
Great.
That's okay.
Thanks, Emily. Thomas?
Yeah, I just wanted to basically say the same thing about BAMS. I didn't get to attend it last night, but there was a meeting. So I don't have anything to report, but I don't know if Keith does.
That's great. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, we had an open house, so we postponed it to the 13th, Tom.
Perfect. Oh, that one. Great. Thank you. Any other councils? Okay. Tim, did you have something to say?
Well, no, our last leadership council meeting was knocked out because of the power outage. And then they met again when it overlapped with another meeting I had. So Mary, if you're here, do you want to comment on that?
I hope Mary went home. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to the committee reports. First, the SUSD Diversity Equity Committee. I don't know if you met between our last meetings. This is the largely staff group. And do you inform us?
The Teachers Diversity and Equity
Yeah,
Committee?
yes.
Oh, if I'd have known you wanted that report, I'd have brought the minutes with me.
Well, it just, okay, well, we'll put it off till the next meeting. It just got added to our committee reports. I think at the last meeting, we decided that we wanted to hear from that regular report from that committee as well. But I don't think that, no special notice of that went out, I know, except that it was added to the agenda. So that's my fault. But we'll square that away for the next meeting. Finance Committee, I think Sean already mentioned that they did not meet. Personnel Committee, Kelly,
Personnel Committee has not met.
Okay, thank you. Policy and Amendment Committee has not met. Oh, Ann, did we?
No, we've not met.
Okay. Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee did meet, I believe next. Well, go ahead, Emily, and I'll look up when the presentation is.
Yep, so we met at the end of last month and discussed the main agenda item was actually to finalize our report, which is on Title IX, which we'll be presenting, I believe it's at the 21st, David, the
Yes,
next meeting.
Next meeting.
So we've been working on this for a while in coordination with Chris, and really just looking at an overall view of athletics throughout the district to ensure that there's gender equity, and to make some recommendations that can put us well beyond what's required, and ensure that there's equity, not just in gender, but in other ways too. So we'll be reporting that out next time, and we'll make sure to send that along to the board members well ahead of time, because I think our recommendations are about 4 pages, but as you know, we had sent a while back, you received the Title IX report that Chris had done. And yeah, so I'll send that along again so that people can review it, because you might not remember there's been so much other stuff going on. But we discussed that, made our final recommendations, which we're hoping that the board will support, and then we can get kind of moving on some initiatives, and the administration can figure out the timeline for that. And then at the next meeting is next week, Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. and we'll be discussing really our plans moving forward. We have an issue tracker where we track things that have come up in the past that we wanted to keep on our radar, and so we're going to be making some decisions around what issues we're going to take on next, what issues we have to revisit, like we had said, I had said earlier with Ruby's comments about after school care, and then what are some new issues that we see as integral to the work of the school board. So that'll be next meeting. If you're interested in that, or you're interested in kind of setting a little bit of the course for our committee, please come and share your thoughts.
Thank you, Emily. Thomas, the Climate Crisis Task Force, I believe next week is your presentation.
Next meeting.
Yes, next meeting, right. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we met, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, to finalize any other revisions we wanted to do to our policy proposal, and the different members of the task force have been sending in their revisions, and I'm compiling it to a final document, which I hope to have to all the board members by this time next week, so that you have a good week to look it over before we talk about it in the meeting 2 weeks from now.
Great. Thank you. And Michelle, the Communications Council, I think you had one update or one announcement or new news for us.
Yeah, we haven't met, but we continue to make progress with our goals. With social media, we've connected with each of the administrators for each school page so that we can communicate with each other and share things. We're just trying really hard to make sure that whatever we create is consistent and manageable, not just now, but for years to come as the torch gets passed. And so we are also, I think, pretty close to being able to provide a sign-up list, and we're really just collecting data for anyone who wants to be on a list to receive these agendas, their emails, that they're reminded of these meetings. And that's pretty much where we're at.
Thank you. And Thomas, again, the Social Justice Committee.
Yeah, we
progress?
met last Monday. We continue to talk about diversifying the workforce, which is our big challenge. We also have been doing an ongoing series of interviewing possible vendors for training, and we have to do a couple more this month. Hopefully we'll have them all done this month so that we can make a final judgment on how we want to proceed. We also discussed, Sean had brought up for the Finance Committee that they're going to start looking into possible where in the budget we could find money for doing some training. So I think that's going to be in the next Finance Committee meeting. And then finally, we discussed the possibility of setting aside Wednesday afternoons for committee work within the for the teachers and for the administration on days when the students are not in the buildings. We discussed that. I believe that's it. That's all that I see on the minutes. Yeah, and then we have our next meeting on October 26th.
Thank you. And let's see, Carrie, are you still here? I know I hope the SU board didn't meet, because if they did, I missed it.
Well, you missed nothing. We have not met, but I would expect we should be getting a meeting on the books soon. We do have some warrants we should catch up on.
Okay. And, oh, Mariah, such patience for our pre-K partners. I promised that this would be earlier in the meeting, and boy, was I wrong.
It's okay. Thanks again for having me. We are counting 174 students, and we have 13 partners. Licensed teachers are starting to enter their TS Gold observations because the Agency of Education has set the fall checkpoints date for December 15th. And we're still working on a format to send you, the board, a report of every program. So
Great, looking forward to that. There are a few things that we wanted to try to figure out how to get reports, on paper, well, electronically, instead of people having to come to meetings and sit for almost 3 hours to tell us a little their information. So hopefully it'll be a template we can use to give to other people as well. So thank you for putting that together. We have no unfinished business. We have no new business on the agenda. The public comment on non-agenda items is next. Is there any comment on the non-agenda items that you would like to make? I see Sean's hand up.
Thank you. I was just wondering, you had skipped over communications. Is that right? I didn't hear exactly. Yeah, you didn't do anything. So
No, I mentioned that we had some communications, and that they were going to be response to them would be part of the administrative report.
Because I did receive communications from a parent who has a student at the BOHS, and it was just an interest in finding out what's happened to the Gale report, and just community involvement with the field structure change. So if that could be somehow put in somewhere at some time, I think it would please some parents.
I think if you could, when you receive those communications, if you could send them to me, then I can make sure that they get on the agenda, or that they get a response.
I just received them today.
Oh, okay, great.
We had about 6 emails. I've had an incredibly busy day, so I didn't have time to do any of that.
Great, thank you. And I see Steve with his hand up, but since this is a non-agenda item, we don't typically respond to these things. So I'm gonna, unless it's really pressing, Steve, I want to ask you to wait until we get this on the agenda again.
It was just that the Gale report's coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Any other non-agenda item comments or thoughts? Okay, well, let me briefly go over next agenda. Let's see, we will have the Title IX report from the PPEC, the Climate Crisis Report, discussion about a social justice study group for the board, which was raised a few weeks ago, so I put it on the agenda. And also a conversation about how we could have meaningful student representation on the board. So those are our upcoming, as well as our regular administrative and financial fiscal reports. And we'll see what else. I don't believe we have an administrative or an executive session need today. I don't see anything on the agenda, so I think we may be finished. Andy, do we need an executive session for anything?
We do not need an executive session this week.
Well, then I will call on Ann Beekman to remember our friend Ruth.
Mr. Chairman, there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
I have a second.
Second.
Oh, okay. I think I heard Sean. I see him.
Oh, go for Jim.
Okay, Tim. Seconded by Tim, moved by Ann and seconded by Tim that we adjourn. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.